In today's tutorial, I am going to show you how to set up NintendoDS emulation within Retroarch using the DES core. I'm not sure if that's the way you pronounce it, but I really don't care. So let's go ahead and dig in. First thing we're going to need is Retroarch if you don't already have it. So go ahead and go to retroarch.com and click on this download tab. From here, go ahead and scroll down to near the bottom here and click on Nightly Builds. Now, this tutorial is for Windows. If you are using a different platform, this core might not be on it, so I don't know. If you try to do this on a Switch or any other system and it doesn't show up, chances are this core is not compatible, so sorry. Windows. Do Windows. From here, go ahead and click on x86-64, and then scroll all the way down to the bottom and download retroarch.7zip. Now, after you get this downloaded and extracted, and for whatever reason it doesn't run, you can go up here and download this redistributable mini zip, extract that and run that, and you should be good to go. Once that download is finished, go ahead and extract Retroarch using 7zip. If you don't have it installed, it is a good program to have, so I definitely recommend it. Now that that's done, make sure you have Retroarch where you want to keep it. So I keep things on my desktop for example purposes because it just makes it easier to show you all. But if you want this, say, in a folder called Emulation or in a completely different drive, make sure you put it there before you run the program for the first time. Upon the first run, Retroarch does default all of its directories into itself. So if you don't have it where you want it and you move it later, you will have to delete your config file to start over again. So example here, I just ran Retroarch. If I want to start over again, I could delete this config file. There we go. But just save yourself a headache, have it where you want it the first time, and you're good to go. Anyways, let's go ahead and start up Retroarch. And now I'm going to press F on my keyboard to full screen it. From here, we're going to go down to the online updater with our keyboard, core updater, and then press right on your keyboard to fast scroll down to the Nintendo section. And there are 3 NintendoDS emulators available. There is the current build of DES. If you have an older system, you can download the 2015 version of DES. It'll be less accurate, things might not work as well, but it should run faster for your system. And then there is NintendoDS. So for today's tutorial, we are once again going to be covering DES. I think NintendoDS is going to be a fantastic, more accurate emulator in the long run, but currently NintendoDS in Retroarch just isn't that great. So go ahead and press enter to get that downloaded. Then press backspace to go back out to the main menu. And from here, we can go ahead and start enjoying our NintendoDS games. So we go up to load content, scroll over to where you have your games stored. They could be literally anywhere on your computer. I keep mine on my desktop for demonstration purposes once again. So NintendoDS games, and voila. And by default, your mouse will be assigned as the touch screen. So you can move your mouse around and you can click to start it up. And if you happen to have a controller, you can plug that in and Retroarch should automatically detect it and let you start using it for the games. This works on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch Pro controllers, 8-bit DOS stuff works great. If for whatever reason you plug in your controller and it doesn't work, you can press F1 to go out to the main menu. And you can go to settings here and you can go to input and you can scroll down to the port 1 binds. Make sure your controller is selected and then you can manually assign keys using the selections here. Once your controller is working, you can go back into the quick menu, scroll on down to the controls options within the emulator core, go down to port 1 controls, and you can manually assign what buttons are to what for the DS emulator itself as well. One thing I do want to make sure everyone does set a key for, make sure you have a make microphone noise key selected because this is something that pops up regularly in DS games, so you can just click down on your thumbstick here by default, and it will make the microphone noise. Anyways, once you have these all set up, you are good to start playing your DS games. And that is all you need to do if your only goal is to play NintendoDS games. It's very easy to get set up, very quick, very little hassle. I love it. So if all you want to do is just play a few DS games, this is it for you. This is where the video ends. You don't need to go any further than this, but if you'd like to see some more of the advanced options within the DES core, we will go over those right now. Okay, so one of the first things we're going to need to really take advantage of Desmumi to its fullest potential is a couple of DS firmware and BIOS files. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of Retroarch real quick. And if we scroll back up in our Retroarch folder, there is a system folder here. And once you source your Nintendo DS BIOS and firmware files, you're going to go ahead and drag them right here. Now, I have a video up that shows you exactly how to get these files from your actual DS, so go ahead and click on the link in the top right of the screen as that pops up, or it'll be in the description below. So these files need to be named firmware.bin, BIOS7.bin, and BIOS9.bin. Once you have those placed, go ahead and start back up Retroarch. And we can go ahead and load up another game real quick. Once your game is started, go ahead and press the F1 key real quick. And we're going to scroll down to options, and from here we're going to turn on use external BIOS/firmware. Now we're going to go ahead and press backspace, going to close the content, and we're going to go ahead and scroll down to the history menu and run it again. For this example, I am using Mario Kart DS because it will pull information for your player name from your firmware. So the firmware I dumped in my explanation video came from my wife's DS system, so it is set up with her name that she set up. Say you have your firmware set up in a different way than you want now, you can easily just go ahead and press F1 on your keyboard to go back down to the options menu, and we're going to go ahead and boot into the BIOS. Now for this to work, you do need to be using the external BIOS and firmware, turn on boot into BIOS, and then CPU mode, you need to change this temporarily, I stress temporarily, into interpreter. Now go ahead and press backspace, and we're going to go ahead and close the content again. And then we're going to run it again, and it should boot us right into our Nintendo DS firmware. There it is. And then from here, you can go ahead and customize it like you would on a real DS. So I'm going to go ahead and change my nickname. You can change the birthday if you want, if you're playing something like Animal Crossing. And you can change the color. And once that's all done, you just go ahead and go back, and then press B to quit. System will shut down. Cool. Yes. Awesome. From here, we're going to go ahead and press F1 again. Go down to options again. We're going to turn off boot into BIOS, and we're going to change the CPU mode back to the JIT. Backspace back out to this menu, close the content yet again, and then run it again. And now your firmware is set up so every game on this emulator that you play will pull directly from it and automatically be set up. If for whatever reason you edit that firmware and it still pulls up a different name by default, you can always go into options, edit your nickname, stuff like that. Most games have that, but it's nice to have everything set up by default. Alright, now let's go over some core options that I feel you are all going to want to mess with if you're really into DS emulation. I'm not going to go over everything because it's just kind of a waste of everyone's time at that point. Let's just go over what will actually be needed. Okay, first up, CPU cores. If you have a multi-core processor, go ahead and max this out. It will help you get higher up-resing as we move forward. If you have a 6, 8, 12-core processor, go ahead and change this up to 4. If you have a quad-core processor, leave it at 3. If you have a dual-core, sadly, just leave it at 1. Now, one of the greatest things about having more cores working for your emulator is you can upscale it without taking as much of a performance hit. If you're only using one core and you try to crank this all the way up, you are going to chug. It's bad. It is demanding. So honestly, for many people, I really wouldn't recommend going above 1024x768 on the DS games, but if you have a higher processor, you can try to crank this up higher and see what kind of results you get. So even at 1024x768 on my Ryzen 9 3900X, you can see that this is really tanking the DS emulator. Audio is crackly, it's not running fast, like it's not good. It doesn't work well. So for anyone who thinks that they might have like the beastest of CPUs, this will tank it if you try to upscale too high. So by default on my Ryzen 9 3900X, I can only scale up DS games by 2 times before the performance really takes a hit. If you're running an Intel processor that runs a lot faster and has higher IPC, you might be able to hit that 3, 4 no problem, but honestly, anything above that's going to tank practically everything out there. Now, one of the ways to mitigate this problem is to turn on the OpenGL renderer here, so if we go ahead and turn that on, and then restart our game. Now when we go back into the options and turn on the upscaling, it should be using our GPU instead of CPU. And now we can upscale a lot more than we could before. I'm back on 4X, no more audio or performance issues. So on my GTX 1080, we can go up to about 1536 by 1152 before we start running into those performance issues again. So in my opinion, the sweet spot is really 1280 by 960 when it comes to DS emulation. If you have a much faster graphics card, you can obviously push it further, but I'm not sure how many cards out there are really going to be able to do the full 2560 by 1920. The other benefit of using the OpenGL renderer is you can turn on things like anti-aliasing, texture smoothing. You can adjust depth calculation, stuff like that. It's really cool to mess with. Go ahead and see what you prefer. And there's also the color depth change. So 32-bit color is a lot richer than 16-bit and is pretty dang good. Now, this option does again require a restart. But there we go. This is what it looks like when you have all those options enabled. Who knew DS games could look so good, right? The next option that might be interesting to most of you will be the screen layout. You can select how the screens of the DS will be laid out. Top, bottom, top, left, right, left, top, or bottom only. Sadly, in Retroarch Desmumi, there is no way of rotating the screens for games like Ninja Gaiden or Brain Age, so just keep that in mind as you start playing. Next up is the screen gap. I believe the way to make it look like the real DS is to have a gap of 15. Next up is the mouse pointer. You want to have this enabled if you want to be able to use the DS touchscreen with your mouse. And then if you're using a computer that happens to have a touchscreen, you can change this to touch or mouse functionality. Also for the DS's touchscreen, if you want to use one of your controller's analog sticks, you can set that up here. By default, your controller's R2 right trigger button should be mapped to tapping the DS screen. So if you set your pointer and then you tap your right trigger, you'll be able to select things with the touchscreen. The last thing to talk about is, of course, the microphone button noise type. So again, there should be a hotkey set up in your control option for microphone noise. This is where you can set it to be random or have a pattern. But that is it as far as core options go that I feel most people are going to want to be messing with. So from here, let's go ahead and set up a playlist for our DS games so we don't have to use that file browser every time because that's just awful. So from here, scroll down to the Show Desktop menu. And that'll bring up the Retroarch desktop menu. So from here, we're going to go ahead and make a new playlist. So over in this white space over here, right click, new playlist. Then we're going to type in Nintendo, space, Nintendo DS. And that'll give us a nice little Nintendo DS icon here that we get to look at. Nice, pretty. So go ahead and click on that. In here, go ahead and right click, and we're going to go ahead and add a folder. Now you're going to navigate to where your DS games are stored. On my example, I have them on my desktop, so I'm going to select the folder and select the folder. And from here, we're going to choose Desmumi, Database, Nintendo DS, and press OK. And that just loads every game I already had into that folder right here. And if you want to add cool box arts or anything, you can do that by right-clicking on a game and tell it to download the thumbnail. Now, be warned, you do need to have your games specifically named for how Retroarch's downloader is looking for them, so mine are not listed that way, so that's why I didn't pull up anything here. If this happens to you, don't worry, you can just go ahead and manually add in any images you want, so I like to grab images from GameFAQs. They have lots of box arts uploaded from users, so there's usually something available in pretty decent quality. So I'm going to go ahead and grab Soul Silver, save it to my desktop. Minimize that. So select Soul Silver. Here's my Soul Silver box art. I'm just going to go ahead and drag that over. Now whenever I click on it, it'll pull it up. Now for this playlist to show up inside Retroarch, just go ahead and close down Retroarch and restart it. Now we have a nice Nintendo DS playlist down over here, and if we click on it, it brings up games, and if we select Soul Silver, it brings up the box art as well. But from here, we can just go ahead and click on a game, and it'll load right up. So that pretty much does it as far as DS emulation is concerned in Retroarch. You got your firmware files set up, you got a playlist made, and you know how to get some basic upscaling done. But that's going to go ahead and do it for today's tutorial. If you have any questions on setup, go ahead and feel free to ask me in the comments. I will do my best to try to help you out. There's also the Retroarch forums for anything I might not have an answer to. But as always, thank you so much for watching. It really helps me out that you watch these tutorials. I'm glad I could help you guys out with some emulation setup. It's awesome. Thank you. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that sub button, that dislike button, just depending how much you like today's tutorial. And if you'd like to further help support the channel, you can always click that join button here on YouTube or check on the Patreon link in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. As always, I am just grateful for your consideration. And for everyone that has already done so, thank you so much for being my champions. You make all of this possible. But until next time, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.